Welcome to the new Cyber Frontier, bringing you the latest news, trends, and hottest topics that focus on advances in cybersecurity and cyber industry economics. Our expert yet down-to-earth hosts make cybersecurity straightforward. They ask the tough questions and make this challenging topic something that everyone can understand. Our candid approach lets guests open up on topics we would all like to see addressed. You can find us on the web at newcyberfrontier.com. That's www.newcyberfrontier.com. Now join today's host as he introduces the topic for today's new Cyber Frontier.
So welcome to today's episode of New Cyber Frontier. On today, this year in review episode.
What a year it's been.
What a year it's been. We have in the studio Dr. Murray and myself, and we're kind of doing a roundtable with a couple people. Right now we have Ben Johnson on. He's no stranger here. Been on New Cyber Frontier before. Your episode had the great numbers. Everybody loved the energy and the startup kind of thought process there that's rolling through your brain. But looking at, we're going into year in review. Dr. Murray, thoughts on where things go, and we could definitely hear from Ben. But 2020, what were the themes, and what do you see as what stood out to you there, Ben? And start with you.
Sure. Yeah. So thanks for having me, guys, and always fun to be on here. Great show, and yeah, I mean, sadly, it started with COVID and ended with solar winds and sunburst and all the fun stuff over the last couple weeks. Obviously, it's not fun, but yeah, and then the whole work from anywhere, work from home transition that pretty much happened overnight for firms, and then from a cybersecurity perspective, it was all about how do we continue the business? How do we, have business continuity? I think most cybersecurity teams kind of dropped the security part for a couple of weeks and just, dove into the trenches with the IT teams, and then said, okay, now when we have this new reality, now we have to go back and secure it. And then, of course, on the threat side, you had a lot of ransomware. You had the whole SolarWinds, thing that I talked about and that kind of thing, and a lot of uncertainty throughout the middle of the year. So certainly can talk about all that, but yeah, just a crazy, crazy year and a lot to defend from a cybersecurity perspective.
So what stood out to you the most in 2020? And we could go into all those things, but if you had to say this was the new reality, the new change, the exceptional deficiency, what was it?
Yeah, I think putting sort of the health and kind of global concerns aside, talking more tech, I think it's really the adoption of thousands of offices, right? Basically the work from home office for each company, and what that meant from an IT perspective, and therefore then a cyber defense, cybersecurity perspective, and how do we continue to give people access, and yet knowing that we don't really control physical access anymore, and we don't necessarily have on-prem network monitoring or some of these other things that I think companies built their programs around. So it's really about cloud, it's about remote, it's about endpoints, that kind of thing. And so I think really just the whole distributed nature of cyber defense is really what stood out to me.
Yeah, and you always have a good finger on the pulse of the startup community in that area. What do you think? How was that impacted? It seemed like that almost went silent in cybersecurity.
Yeah, I think at least in the first half of 2020, there was so much uncertainty about the economy and jobs and all the other things that I think in terms of fundraising and that kind of thing, pretty much everything stopped for the summer in terms of startups getting funding or that kind of thing, especially from the very early side, right? If you already had a company going and a venture going, I think then you got more attention because the investors wanted to place, what they considered maybe a safer bet, putting more money into an existing investment. And then from what security companies or startups tried to do, I think everyone tried to help, right? I mean, I think it was all about, hey, how can we continue to build our businesses, but still understand that, there is a lot of uncertainty and teams are overwhelmed and they're trying to do IT and security now and all these other things. So how can we help enable them and, just work more collaboratively together? So I think it was a really good year for learning, and it was really interesting. And now we're starting to, I think, come out of that and get a little bit back more towards normal in the startup scene.
Yeah. Definitely. Let's take a break here from our sponsors. We'll be right back after this break.
Cyber Resilience Institute helps build strong cyber communities designed to prevent members from attack. Like building a neighborhood watch, it takes coordination and a sharing community to protect our identities and valuables in the virtual world. Typically, we hear that organizations know they need to do something to protect their cyber assets, but don't know where to begin. Let Cyber Resilience Institute help your community create an action plan. Cyber Resilience Institute will build your community or business marketplace so that it is designed to support a collective cyber defense. Contact them for more information at cyberresilienceinstitute.org.
Welcome back to New Cyber Frontier. On today, this year in review, Dr. Murray, myself, and Ben Johnson. Dr. Murray, thoughts on, I was doing most of the talking before. I know you got something built up there.
Yeah, Ben, great contributions to the community. Just like Chris said, lots of focus on your last contribution to the show. So I'd like to shift kind of to artificial intelligence. So in 2019, we saw lots of the key stakeholders with their various technologies. We're going to be kind of agnostic on pointing out who. But now, with all the data that's being collected worldwide, due to the pandemic and all of these different things we're learning, where do you see AI? It doesn't seem to be on the forefront of the focus, probably because of the pandemic and of course the election and all the other things that are going on. Where do you see AI right now, and where do you see it going here probably in the next year or so?
Yeah, I think AI is one of those challenging topics because there's a lot of promise and even a lot of delivery, like a lot of true value that's added. Yet there's also a lot of buzzwords and marketing, and so cutting through the noise is always challenging. Yeah, I think what do we all need? We all need more time. We all need more people, more expertise. Sort of pick your deficiency there, but they all kind of come down to like there's a lot that we're trying to defend and do, and not necessarily a lot of defenders. And so anything that can help advance our leverage or increase our leverage in terms of one person can now defend a bigger environment or do more. And, I think you start to think about automation, and you start to think about things like AI and ML, where it can help you make better decisions, maybe point out more important insights to go look at, or alerts, or better things to spend your time on. So I think AI will continue to impact cybersecurity in a very positive way in terms of taking all of this behavioral data, or just, for example, who has privileges and who maybe doesn't need privileges, or all these other things where as a human, you could probably figure it out, but it's going to take a long time and a lot of analysis, whereas machines should be able to do that quite quickly and continuously. So I think AI is going to continue to help on a more continuous assessment, continuous monitoring sense, whether it's behavior and looking for anomalies and that kind of thing, or from, hey, here's some people that aren't using their accounts or don't need all these privileges. Like, I think there's a lot of people excited about that kind of application of machine learning and AI, where you can look at someone's peer groups and, job titles and other things and try to discern like, hey, this is not what we would expect. Like, why does this person have God mode basically in this application when no one else on their team does? And so I think there is a lot of promise for AI to help identify some of those areas, and then still have a human kind of dive in and make the final call.
Yeah. I heard you say should and could and probably quite a few times. And I've been hearing those words around AI probably for almost a decade.
Right.
Have we got any closer? It seems like that's kind of the point I think I heard Dr. Murray is this year it seemed to like go out of focus. Have we moved it forward? Where are things at?
Yeah, I think it's moving forward. There's more data. There's more understanding of the right ways to apply, AI or ML or other topics, because it's all about getting good data in. You can't just like hook up quote unquote AI to your network or your cloud systems or whatever, and it just finds evil. I mean, that's the goal. But you really have to make sure the right data is going in, and you're thinking about the right, labeling and classifications and all these other aspects. And I think we as a cybersecurity community are getting a better sense of the kinds of problems that AI is good at and how to insert that into a human team and then, advance the team. So I do think there's a lot of progress that's been made, and it'll continue to move forward over the next couple of years. And so I do think it is adding efficiencies or better alerting or other things. It's just not like a plug it in, walk away, and your, Skynet just saves the day kind of thing.
Yeah, I would go along with that. Chris and I were talking before the session. In many industries, this pandemic has created petabytes worth of data. Humanistically, we're not going to be able to do that until you get to a level 3, level 4 AI solution to be able to parse through all of that and make use or valuable use of all of the data that's been collected. Now, data scientist is the number one most sought after position in many different industries. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's, breaking down what you said, there's a lot of data. So that's a positive for training AI, training ML, applying, different algorithms to the data sets. So it starts with collecting all the data, but then again, you have to kind of normalize it or put it in the right formats so that it's, understood and it can feed into these systems. And then again, I think it comes back to stepping back and saying, hey, where should we truly apply some of these technologies to either fill a gap in our team, to increase in efficiency, to create leverage, whatever it is. It's not just about throwing data at the problem. It's more like, what is the problem you want to solve with AI? I think that's a question we don't ask enough as cyber defense teams or security programs. And then working backwards and saying, okay, what data do we need? What can we apply from a technology or an algorithm perspective? Then what is it supposed to do in terms of the workflow, right? Is it supposed to enhance the SOC? Is it supposed to talk directly to the account owner, the employee who's maybe not technical? So I think we still need to figure out some of these things just as a community. I do think there's progress there, and I do think it starts with the data, to your point, but we still have to ask ourselves some of these questions.
Yeah, it's all about that. I think you're talking about the value of the data and then what can we use it for?
Yep.
Mm-hmm. So if I'm looking at startup community and, what if I had $1 million to fund something that's going to be the next thing, what would that be, and how has that changed from last year?
Yeah, good question. I think startups are always trying to be ahead of the game, or, it's going to take maybe a couple years to build your product or whatever. And so you have to be thinking down the road. And I think the whole sort of digital transformation, cloud migration was already happening. And then COVID poured gasoline on it, and then SolarWinds maybe was like the dynamite on top of that, or whatever analogy you want to use, because the attack vector was more on-prem to start with there. So I think you're already trying to figure out how, as a organization, can I do less around IT and my own sort of management, and more just enabling our competitive differentiation. If the company doesn't need to buy hardware or manage systems, and it can all be SaaS or AWS or whatever it is, I think there's some huge efficiencies there. So then from a security or a startup perspective, where are things going? And I think you're still going to have employee devices, so endpoints, phones, etc. Cloud is a huge area. I mean, you have IaaS, PaaS, SaaS, you have all sorts of different things within those, right? I mean, every day Amazon or Microsoft add more and more services, within their ecosystem, like different databases and stuff. So if you care about security, how do you defend those? You have more and more SaaS apps. You have IoT is still, I think, I don't know that it got necessarily a lot of play this year, at least in terms of my exposure to media and stuff like that, but it's huge, right? I mean, it continues to do smart cities and industrial control systems and stuff like that. So I think there's still a lot of opportunity there. And then, there's still what role do humans, or does the SOC play within these companies, especially when the companies are getting decentralized in terms of each business unit has more control over the technology they're using, right? I mean, HR might be bringing in Workday, and sales team might be bringing in Salesforce, or whatever it is. Okay, but now it's starting to be a more distributed technology ecosystem in your company. So what does that mean for cybersecurity, and how can you build systems that maybe stitch different systems together to give monitoring to the SOC, or do you give something as a security product that's used by someone that's less maybe technical or less security knowledgeable but can still defend? So I think there's different areas to invest in, but I think it comes down really to things like cloud, endpoints, IoT, and then areas like automation and AI, like we talked about before. So, it still would depend on the team and what you believe in your investment. I think it starts with the people. Like you got to first and foremost invest in the people. But, it's a tough question and one that investors are always trying to figure out, like, what is the next, big thing.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things you mentioned, Ben, that is a key point is all the different business units invest in the technology to make themselves either more efficient or, provide some return on investment. But, oftentimes we see those business units don't involve in the procurement system, the procurement process or the acquisition process. Now we're going back to supply chain. What are they introducing to the what risk are they introducing to the organization that we could have vetted prior to them going out and purchasing stuff? I go back and specifically recall one client. She was the CISO of a $43 billion healthcare organization here in the United States. While she was in one of our courses, two physicians had gone out, bought some Google Glasses, a collaboration platform. They were doing a follow-up with a patient who had just had a partial mastectomy, and it was being broadcast with 47 medical students halfway across the world in India. No disclosure, no consent. So we still have those challenges, don't we?
Oh yeah. I think, what I've heard recently is that CISOs have built relationships with finance, and so they've basically got finance to agree to not sign off on anything unless security has reviewed it. So there's some of those wins, I think, that are starting to happen in terms of relationship building or inserting in the correct part of the process, or at least that, I'm not saying that's the correct part of the process, but at least that's like your last, point of no return kind of thing. If you can involve security earlier or as the security program, you can go to these different business units and get a security champion who's at least going to involve you in some of the vetting, the vendor risk management, the assessment. Do they even have SOC 2, or do they encrypt the data, or whatever, right? Whatever it is, how is this going to be used in the environment? Are you going to bring this into the environment, put our critical data in, and we actually see this a lot, put our critical data in the system, and then hire a bunch of offshore developers and give them administrator access, right? Like, not saying you can't do that, but like your security team should probably know, that's happening. And so, I think a lot of it comes down to process, and, security team does have to try to say yes most of the time. Otherwise, people are just going to go around you in this day and age. So it's really like, how do you say yes, but still vet and give your concerns and give your assessment, and then try to instill best practices and policies. So I think it's challenging, but you got to have these multiple control points. Try to build the upstream relationship with the business unit, but then that sort of downstream, protection with finance of like, hey, you're not going to pay for something unless you've seen me sign off on it, or something like that, as the CISO or the security lead. So I think, it is challenging, but I think security teams are starting to figure out how to sort of play the process game.
Mm-hmm. So, keeping these short because we have a couple people ringing on. One other thing I wanted to put in here, we get a bite on, and we'll separate this out. Anything you can say about the SolarWinds hack that, or whatever, that might be something we need to get out to the general public?
The SolarWinds attack was really just taking advantage of the complicated environments and the supply chain and the upstream mechanisms we have. But that's also just the attack vector. Once you get in, there's a lot that could be done. They could be reading email, files, spreading, all these other things. So I think it's creating awareness around what are all the open doors or open windows in our environments? All these different systems are integrated. You have API tokens, you have contractors. So really trying to understand your surface area, but then also understanding, like, if someone got into your domain controller, what would they do downstream? And I think stepping back and assessing your environment is something we all need to do.
All right. Well, thanks. Good. Always good to hear a little bit from people involved with it, what it is that they're looking at and addressing.
We've got a special guest, Doc Klodnicki, CEO and founder of Arity, here in Colorado Springs. Doc, you and I go way back. We've created our own messes in the world, but welcome to the show. We're looking at a year in review for 2020, global pandemic, technology, cybersecurity. What are your thoughts on what you've seen over the last year since this pandemic has started?
Wow. Yeah, quite the year. I would say that, CMMC and the accreditation body got started at the beginning of the year. Then the pandemic hit. And then we had the supply chain issues associated with the pandemic. The CMMC model continued to grow. The interaction between the accreditation body and the government continued to mature. Supply chain issues became a big deal. Then here in fall, there was a signature between the government and the accreditation body. We got some training done of a number of different levels of certification at the initial level under CMMC. And then we had the FireEye Solar Wind. And so if you didn't go to college, but were alive during 2020, you got a master's degree in how does business really respond across the board. And so I think if you focus on just the cybersecurity aspect, I think there's a couple of things that we've learned we need to continue to work on. And I would say one is the taxonomy. Cybersecurity professionals know what they're talking about, and they tend towards terminology, acronyms, and skipping steps, because you don't always, so when you tell someone, hey, get your shoes on, you don't say, and make a loop and go around, or, push the Velcro down. And so in cybersecurity realm, we're dealing with businesses who are trying to understand the taxonomy of cybersecurity. And so they may understand what an AR loan is. Accounts receivable loan is a loan against money that's promised to you. If you say VPN, they may just go, I don't know what you mean. And then likewise, we're seeing that some companies are willing to just jettison the use of the electronic media and go back to just hard copies. Send me a hard copy and I'll put it in my desk drawer. I'll secure it in that way. And so we're finding a lot of adaptive behaviors within small business. And then always the cost. When do I need to spend money to be cyber secure, and how much do I need? Is it worthwhile to spend $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 now to get basic cyber hygiene that has absolutely no chance of being able to be built upon to get CMMC in 5 years? Or do I put $15,000, $30,000 into something now that can scale later? And that's going to have to be a business decision made by a business person who either does or doesn't have the money. Cash flow is king, and whether or not they want to go into a loan situation. And then now you've got, you always had a CEO, a COO, a CFO, and we've created a couple Cs over the last few years, and now the CIO. You can hire a CPA and they can perform the functions of your CFO. Well, you could hire an IT cybersecurity specialist to perform the functions as your CIO. But there's a little bit more to it than that. So an accountant, a CPA serving to your business needs, your financial business needs, doesn't need to have some signatures on some documents because the president signs it in lieu of. Cybersecurity, you can't have a rent cybersecurity expert, the documents, the NIST and whatnot, they don't allow for that. And so now the president either has to get smart on that and sign in these small companies, or they need a more permanent solution. And so you're seeing a lot more of the information technology, cybersecurity professionals moving. And it's kind of interesting this year alone when you think that the business impact of the pandemic. Yet there seems to be more and more IT cyber folks who are putting it on a shingle and opening up their own company and leaving some of the bigs. I think there's still a natural maturation process that needs to occur for those professionals. It's one thing to have your laptop connected to a secure server, service. It's another thing to run multiple laptops, multiple workstations across a larger system with mobile phones connected and an IR plan and an ISP and all. It's a lot more. And so as you begin to mature inside that environment, you become more valuable, and you get to come back to your roots and see the smile on the face of a president who's writing you a check saying thank you, versus just getting your paycheck and having someone call you, why won't my cell phone work? You're like, oh man, there's a touch there. And I think some of that human touch is because we've been restricted from each other as well over the year. And human beings are naturally that way, especially as introverts, you and me, Shawn. We need that human interaction. And while Zoom and Teams are great platforms for having those virtual meetings, there's still that touch part that's kind of been missing, and we're finding that's becoming part and parcel to it. And I think also the larges are figuring out ways to keep the smalls more included in their efforts. Some of the larges are offering cybersecurity as a service in a roundabout way. And so when you're a company that has to have all of your information accessible by your service provider, your cybersecurity service provider, you begin to get a little nervous. And so you can understand why the controlled unclassified information needs to be stored on a server, but why does my financial stuff need to be there as well? Well, because it's all on the same network. And so you begin to see, well, what options are there really then for these smalls? How much is it going to cost? When do they need to get this level versus next level? How are you going to go about doing your self-assessment? Because even these self-assessments aren't necessarily written for someone unless they have a modicum of a background in information technology and cybersecurity. Just simple words like user and admin. And it's like, well, yeah, I have admin privileges because when I bought this laptop, it asked who's the admin. It's like, well, not quite the same thing as what is used within the cybersecurity community. So it's been interesting, that's for sure.
Yeah. It's a great.
It's been a lot more collaboration.
This is a great time to actually pause talk, and we're going to come right back. We're talking to Dr. Richard Klodnicki, President CEO. He's given us of Arity, giving us his perspectives. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back to the new Cyber Frontier. My name is Shawn Murray. We've got Chris Gorog and I are doing an end of year. We've got a special guest from Arity, Doc Klodnicki. He's given us his perspectives. Doc's background is a lot with the military, the government, and he's sharing his perspectives as being a member of the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Board, and the challenges that we see during the global pandemic for protecting that supply chain. Chris, what questions might you have for Doc regarding the supply chain based on, some of the things that he was discussing a little bit earlier?
The first thing that always comes to mind, and I like to play the devil's advocate on this one a little bit, is I've been around this for a couple of years, and I've seen about every 2 years, a whole new compliance format comes along. The RMF, we got the NIST 171, now the C2M2. I think there was a couple in between there. And it's like, oh yeah, it's going to be required next year. Oh yeah, we promise.
We're the government.
We're the government. We're going to require it mandatory. Is this one really stick?
Well, they say that past performance is never a predictor of future. However, reliability studies always have you look at what have you done in the past, and it's probably going to do the same thing again. So, in the military, we use the term, a performance report bullet. Someone has to change something, otherwise they don't get a bullet saying they existed on their report. And some of these standards are just getting renamed and relabeled. Some of them are clearly adaptive to the new environment in which we're in. And I think without a small bit of history onto how the World Wide Web and the Internet of Things came about, it was originally designed as a sharing platform. It was a closed sharing platform, but it was a sharing platform. And when you opened it up to the world, you were expecting from a security standpoint that you had built your foundation on solid concrete. No, you built it on sponge with all kinds of holes so that you could get information in and out. And we just run around the basement all the time, plugging in new holes, finding new holes, finding out that the hole we plugged really is an ancillary hole to another bigger hole. And so from that perspective, it's going to be a perpetual battle. And it's also just another way for other human behaviors to be exacerbated. So there's always been, competitive intelligence, and then competitive intelligence sometimes comes into corporate espionage. Well, it's the same thing when you talk about human. If I go dumpster diving, you've thrown it away. The law says it's trash. But if it's a list of all the passwords across the system, and you wrote proprietary information on there, now what? So if you take that hard copy construct and apply it to the electronic world, you've got companies out there that will offer you a password protection capabilities. I don't use them, but you go along the lines of you type in your common one and it sorts it for you and creates this one and blah, 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 blah. Well, is that part of cybersecurity? Is that part of cyber hygiene? Is that a password? Well, it started out username password. And then for good cyber or information technology, it's still a password. And then information technology became cybersecurity. And now it's cyber hygiene. So yeah, the words keep changing, but it's still the same thing. What's your username and password, and protect it. And I think there's a strong corollary between that and, say, the COVID-19, right? Don't sneeze on people, cover your sneeze. Don't go to work if you're sick. Cover your face as much as you can, socially distance, those sorts of things. Well, don't share your password with the world. Don't share your user ID and password. When you load files onto a system that's shared, make sure that everyone who's sharing it isn't sick. They don't have the virus. So there's, I think that if you can make those kind of connections, then you begin to see, oh, wait a minute, this virus is morphed. Yeah, cybersecurity morphs. So it does change. And I think 2 years is a pretty good number there. And so it takes a while for people to notice a problem, to find a solution, and then to incorporate it into the general business practices. I work with small businesses, startup smalls. And so every penny they spend has to be a value add for them. And so I explain them, I say, look, it's like when you look at a house. If you're driving down a street and you have ill intent, you want to go into someone's building. If their front door is open, their window's cracked open, and you can see all kinds of gold trinkets, right? But if the front door is locked and the window's open, but there's a cactus under the window, you might go to the next house. And so cybersecurity, cyber hygiene is really about saying, this is not a most hospitable environment for you. Go somewhere else. Mm-hmm. And so that's why when you go to the government's website and you do your assessment, they're basically saying, do you have 110 things that you can say about your house that tell the nefarious character, move along? Are you going to be protected from someone who's got a machine that just comes along, picks up your house and takes it and go? No. You're small, and the FireEye and the Solar Wind is a perfect example of even the bigs can get hacked. And the saying in the cybersecurity world is the defender has to be right 100% of the time. The attacker only has to be right once.
Yeah.
And then the floodgates are open. I also think there's been some real amazing movement. I'm really blessed to work with a number of companies who are doing cybersecurity things that are absolutely amazing. Real-time cyber stream capture and assessment, so that when you get an alert, you don't have to pull all the tapes out and then do it. You can do it real time. So the tools are fast, the alerting system is fast, the storage capacities are humongous. The virtualization of machines, the separation of data, it's just incredible every day what happens that is a positive behind the scenes. Kind of like, think about your heart beating and your lungs, expanding and contracting. It just sort of happens. Well, now we're getting much better at moving the blood. We're getting much better at detecting things. You know, the liver we have a much better liver on our system, and your lungs and heart are just moving along. They don't notice any difference. And wow, it's been a long time since I've had a cold. I wonder, you know, and so there's just a better approach to the body of the cybersecurity. But because of that, that means that when there is a damage or an injury, it's that much more catastrophic. And so when we start looking at, you know, 2 years ago, would anybody have predicted the supply chain issues that we have? If they did, I'm sure they put that bet down and are very wealthy right now. But, you know, you do have some supply chain issues. You do have some cybersecurity issues. And so you have the concerns of, well, what you know, used to be, you call the IT desk, right, the help desk, and go, well, why can't I access this? Well, that's a stupid rule. You know, and people are like, well, you don't understand why we do that. There's more and more people now that understand some of these rule sets that we have in place, because they're getting a letter in the mail saying, congratulations, your credit card was approved and it will be mailed to not your address. And they're going, whoa, I should have perhaps not asked for that little bit of freedom in the system. And I think that, again, we need to get that taxonomy more inculcated into the common vernacular of the business person. We need to understand that these are necessary costs for some, and or prohibitive costs for other, or barriers to entry for yet another. And this applies outside of the government contracting. I can't remember the number of states now where the law tells you that you have to secure data. So when you get your business insurance, you can get cybersecurity insurance. I mean, but even if you have the insurance, you're still liable for your behavior to not secure the information. And so the reasonable person construct that we have across our legal system, now within the business system, what is that reasonable person? Now we've added an aspect to the reasonableness of and cybersecurity and cyber hygiene. So it's gonna get it's gonna get taught more and more. I think you'll see high school students also getting taught some of this, as opposed to just the cursory, don't share your password with anybody and that's it. You never hear anything more about cyber hygiene for the rest of the time you're in high school. You know, I mean, you look at some of these white hat events, you know, these hacking events. It's incredible how much younger some of these phenomenal hackers are, because they get it. They understand the history that the basement is made of sponge, and there's just lots of places to poke around and find things, and they're beginning to understand how we are architected. And so when you try and find
being raised with the technology, right?
Oh yeah.
And so we're going to come right back, and we'll hit back on that. We're going to take a break right after this. We're talking to Doc Klodnicki from Arity. We'll be right back after this. Welcome back, New Cyber Frontier. Shawn Murray, Chris Gorog with Doc Klodnicki from Arity, talking about what this pandemic has done to the business community, and you know, focus on this discussion a lot having to do with cyber hygiene. You know, one of those key buzzwords as it applies to those who are part of the supply chain, cybersecurity maturity model. So let's go back to that conversation about the technology and that small business that may be part of the supply chain. So we talked about some of the challenges of CMMC, you know, progressing during a pandemic, and some of the things that, you know, we've decided. It was published last month. The new rendition of, hey, here's level 1, here's level 3, this is what you have to do, these are the controls. They kind of made it a little bit easier. But, you know, when I look at the stimulus packages that are coming out, I don't see anything that says we're going to help you become CMMC level 1 or level 3, and it's investment in time and technology. Given that you're a manufacturer and you don't know anything about cyber, yeah, we're seeing companies that are part of that supply chain saying, you know what, don't want anything to do with it. There's no guarantee I'm going to get this contract. You're telling me I have to be CMMC level 3, and you know, I'm bidding against 5 other companies or 50 other companies. You know what? I'll find something else to do. How are you? What are your thoughts on that piece?
Well, and it works the other way as well, Shawn, and that's a really good question. So when we look within the federal government and the mandates on doing business within the federal government and what are called the representations and certifications, so when you submit your proposal, you represent that your company has a certain capability and you certify that capability. And if you lied, then you're in big trouble because you've lied on a government form. Same can be said going the other way, that if you're not working with a government contract, you're working in the civilian market or non-federal market, non-government market. If you make a representation of your capabilities, we talk about there's now some laws in different states that say, no, you represented yourself as being able to do these things. And so now you have to do those things. And so what we're finding is that through some really amazing small business incentive programs that we have in a number of different areas across this country, both all the branches of the service, but especially the new U.S. Space Force and its digital, it's a desire to be a digital service. We're finding that there's a number of capabilities outside of the DoD contracting world that are going to match really well. They just haven't labeled it the way that the government labels things. And so if you can get that Rosetta Stone to transfer your terminology to government terminology, and you take that 110 step, you might find out that you've got 90 of them already. You just didn't know it because you didn't speak government speak. But by the same token, you've got some really phenomenal capabilities that the government is looking at and going, wow, if I do this one capability, I only need 103 because this one takes over these 7 or additional 6. 6 plus 1, 7, 710, 103, right? Never do math out loud in public. And so you begin to see that these competencies that are outside of the government contracting world have a lot of validity within it. And I think that the understanding from the DoD was that once we've got CMMC certified, right, and we start this program going, codified, sorry, it's going to acculturate outside of this market, and we're going to find, because God bless America, it's capitalist, right? You're going to go, hey, there's a want and a need, and I have a service or a product for a customer. The government's going to, they have this gaping hole, in your mind as a business, you see it as a gaping hole because you can drive a truck through it. Great. Other people won't. Oh, there's a pinprick in the sponge basement. I know how to fill that. And you come in with that capability, and all of a sudden you go, wow, that has even more capability than we originally thought. And again, now you're 107, let's just say, 103. I mean, let's just say this one takes 3 more off the list. So now you only have 100. And you just keep going and going until you start finding that what is a very standard format outside of DoD can come in and become a standard. Now you always have the problem that if everything is standard, then it becomes a single point of failure, right? So you still want to have some of that leeway and luxury, and you don't want to restrict businesses from being able to run their own businesses. But they do need to be cyber secure. So you're basically saying, look, don't show up on the field to play if you're sick. Have some good cyber hygiene. Don't come to work sick. Don't come to our system with a virus. Don't come to work with a vulnerability that could hurt others. It's a very collective kind of approach, but it's being handled through capitalism. And I think that's really where you're going to keep the innovation coming. And like you said, the youngsters that are growing up day in and day out with this stuff. I mean, you ask them, hey, when was the last time you got clotheslined by the telephone cable in the kitchen? And they just look at you like they have no clue what you're talking about. And people my age are going, oh, that happened all the time.
Welcome back to New Cyber Frontier on a special year-end review. Dr. Murray here with me. We're both in the same room. As usually, you don't hear from us on the same podcast together.
No, it's great. It's great. Great idea to, summarize a great year.
Yeah. And with
I can't wait on that.
That's right.
And also we have Senator Kent Lambert, who was a previous senator in Colorado, joining us to give kind of our legal perspective, and a great segment here with this segue into it. Quite a toxic environment this year in general. We won't even say disease toxic. We'll say legislative and government toxic. What give us a review of your thoughts for 2020.
Well, just, 2020, I think everybody is still sort of in the state of shock for 2020 and wants to move on. I mean, that's what we keep hearing, let's move on and make things better and so forth. And, I think everybody knows I like the, the official mascot of 2020 was the raccoon, because he's incessantly washing his hands, always wears a mask. And if you mix up the letters in raccoon, they spell Corona. So, we've all gone through that. I think we're at a point now where we're saying, well, what the heck is going on here? How can we get out of this? And I think that is complicated to a large extent by public policy that's not very unified, and we don't know where we're going, or where we want to go in some of these things. So even, in some states, my son lives in California, and a lot of people, California, New York, other places, are absolutely fit to be tied because they see a lot of maybe well-meaning policies, but the well-meaning policies are not typically working. As a matter of fact, they seem to be, in many cases, counterproductive. So going into 2021, I'm getting a hit on the questions here, but I think for a while, we're still stuck in this malaise here. I think we're going to have a hard time climbing back out of this. And I think just because the calendar's rolling over is probably not going to have a lot of good news, at least for several months.
Yeah. And here towards the end of the year, we had talked about right before we got on the show here that there's been a lot of recent compromises with solar winds and the FireEye issues. And what does that do for the political environment? And your take was that, we already know there's a gag order. None of the companies involved can talk about anything from the federal government. That's the opposite of openness and unsiloed that we were pushing for over the last couple of years. Does this drive us back to the Stone Age with visibility and openness and security?
Well, I think it very well could. I mean, we have to have a balance of good security and then openness and honest, open, informed discussion in our policies. And my experience, I was in state government for 12 years. And one thing that really aggravates me all the way from the time of 9/11 is very little sharing with the state governments in areas of, especially about information security, cybersecurity. We have two levels of government. There are very few checks and balances, and where Homeland Security really should be based upon the states, we've really never gotten to that point of information sharing. So how do state governments, how do state legislators make policy when they are excluded from critical information? That is a huge issue, and that will continue until we get better. And the knee-jerk reaction on solar winds is lock everything down, don't say anything about it. And I can understand the logic of the security side of that, but to establish good constructive policies that will stop this type of cyber attack and this type of threat in the future, as well as our internal vulnerabilities, we need to have informed people who are making informed decisions, and not just in one branch of government.
Yeah. It sounds like the immediate gag order, and then if information never comes out or never does, in the last few years I've heard we have to break down the silos between different departments in the government, different facets of the government, different companies and the government, private partner or public-private partnerships. And as soon as anything major happens, we shut it all, we go back. What are your thoughts on that, Shawn?
It's funny because I'm sitting here thinking back in circa 2011, NSA called up the CEOs of several major defense contractors and called them all up to the fort and handed them a folder, each one of them, saying, this is what they got from you. This is what they got from you. This is what they got from you. you apply that to the state and federal government relationship. How many state systems are connected to federal systems, which, this conversation doesn't even make sense as to why you wouldn't have a collaborative discussion with your state, your IT folks or your state governments.
I think some of our IT folks are frankly at the state level are kind of shut out from the mainstream also. I mean, one of the things that we have a problem with is, for instance, security clearances. There are no common security clearances except maybe for very senior officers in state government, like the governor, maybe the lieutenant governor. But in state legislatures, that just doesn't happen. And that's I can understand it from the security point of view, but it doesn't help solve the problem.
Welcome back to this segment on New Cyber Frontier, the end of year review. And it's been a great talk with a lot of different guests we had on here that you'll see pieced together in this. Right now we're kind of, Dr. Murray and I, closing this out and finalizing, some of the things we didn't hear. We're going to touch on from our list of what we thought was, valuable in the year 2020 and into 2021. So thanks for joining today, Shawn. And
this is a great idea. We should do this every year.
Yeah, definitely. So when we're looking at just some of the things that we had the guests covered, from startups to government to political. We had some of the international organizations.
Some pandemic stuff.
Supply chain, and the big theme 2020 was that we realized some holes in going to remote, everybody at home. We couldn't see everybody. Supply chains became an issue. We all saw it in the toilet paper.
Misinformation campaigns, right? Social engineering.
Misinformation, yes.
Yeah.
And we got the political environments could be called a disaster.
Well, all of it. The perfect storm we talked about earlier with our earlier guest, right? So you've got a campaign running, you've got a global pandemic, you've got, small business, everybody's vying for resources all over the place. So, there's little focus in the beginning of the year on cybersecurity, and then, that caught up with us in the end.
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the areas when we're talking about supply chain, we got into, a lot of the military and the physical supply chain and what's going on with the new shift to Amazon and big behemoth companies and shipping. But critical infrastructure seemed like in Homeland Security, shifting to the pandemic, adjusting, kind of lost track of, what's going on with critical infrastructure.
It's funny because we've done a lot of podcasts and some webinars and stuff on various elements of supply chain as it affects various areas of our federal government, like the FCC, communications, supply chain as it's associated with moving products and supplies around the United States. Most of it's automated now. So if it's automated, how are we protecting it? This goes back to our conversation earlier about tangible versus intangible. So, the perception of people, if I can see it, I can touch it, it means something to me. Whereas something that you subscribe to, like cybersecurity services, MSSP, or if I can't see it, then it's not there. Right. Mm-hmm. So, but we know that it is there, and we've been the recipient of big attacks and disruptions, and sometimes the attacks aren't even known for months to a year, past things. So, it's crazy, and I think we'll have a job forever. Yeah.
Well, in critical infrastructure, I think has taken a new turn here, where now we've realized that our supply chains are critical infrastructure. The entities we trust are critical infrastructure. Do we trust the government? Do we trust Amazon, which is what we've all turned to?
Right.
Yeah. Do we trust our small mom and pop stores? Our heads shaking because we changed our mind.
And all of them are part of the national critical infrastructure. There's various categories where they're all represented, and it's not all government. A lot of it has to do with commercialization of a country with free trade, mm-hmm. and a lot of it's based on on the trust associated with those areas that contribute to the overall success of our economy, to our political infrastructure. We're in the ability to just get things to where they need to be. When we talk about industrial control systems, you're talking about the power grid, the utilities, right? There's one flavor. You're talking about transportation. There's another flavor. You can talk about how we get fuel from one side of the country to the other, or from across the globe, as part of the supply chain. They're all manufacturing, another flavor. And they all use very unique types of systems that are vulnerable to being either hacked or through the business network.
Manipulated in some way.
Right.
Yeah.
That's the point, right? So industrial control systems, I have actually seen a lot of discussion this year. There's a gal that I was participating with in a cyber leadership strategy earlier this year, who is the CISO for a Kuwaiti oil company. And so her discussion is on supply chain from the time that they actually extract oil, turn it into various, types of fuel, and then how they distribute that globally. There's lots of different industrial control systems that are now connected via cellular networks, via IP, Ethernet networks, that she has to keep those types of things into consideration. So that's just one aspect of it, right?
Yeah. And there's a couple countries that have not been affected by the pandemic. You think, how's that possible?
Right.
But I think it was South Korea, their GDP has actually increased because of the global pandemic.
Yep.
And I saw this in one of our IEEE of International Global Economics reviews for the 2020. And there was several countries at the top there where they actually attributed it to their infrastructure already being virtual almost 100% and distributed, and their critical infrastructure being established within enough recent enough times that they don't have the miscommunication problems or the antiquated equipment problem that we have in the U.S., where our critical infrastructure still has stuff operating from the 30s and 40s.
Well, I think part of that, in a previous conversation, is also geopolitical. So some countries have a better geopolitical collaboration, whereas, take a look at what happened here in the last year, just having a global pandemic during an election year. We've seen a lot of we use the word toxicity, both realms. So what's your priority compared to this priority? Is it bipartisan? Who's going to get the money? We talked about CMMC, how that's affecting the supply chain. What the federal government's doing with the state government. No collaboration. Everything's shutting down as far as communication goes, and it should be wide open.
I think you brought up some trusted intelligence source, cyber intelligence. We look to things, three-letter agencies in the U.S., the NSA, but we found out in the last couple weeks actually, that whenever something actually happens, the NSA becomes the NSZZZZ.
Right.
Be quiet, shut up, keep everything under wraps.
We've seen a lot more from CISA this year, under Homeland Security. I think they're more the voice of the rest of the public. But, a lot of that comes in NSA, DIA, whoever the intelligence agencies are, they stood up after 9/11, Director of National Intelligence. How does that feed back into a collaboration between the states and the other, alphabet agencies like FBI, Homeland Security.
And the private sector, companies too.
Absolutely.
Private partnerships.
To be able to educate them and be ahead of the game instead of responsive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And the misinformation. How do you weed out? How many times our kids come home and say, this is happening, and they just saw something on social media.
Right. And we've seen that. I mean, just we were talking earlier, I think there is a responsibility with social media platforms to be able to weed out misinformation campaigns. We've seen some speak coming from some of the bigger ones on how they've been able to disrupt misinformation campaigns, but it could be an individual. It could be a organized crime. It could be a state actor. All they needed to do is plant a seed, let it grow. If you promote it in enough areas, everyone else will grasp onto it and send it out. The latest one I just heard last week was, from a family member, a close family member, in my circle, we're not going to get that vaccine because the government has put a chip in each one of the vaccines. I'm like, do you know the logistical, nightmare that would take? How many, was there 25 doses in a vial? How do you separate, 25 chips to make sure they get into that tiny little syringe? We're not organized enough to do that.
So
misinformation
and conspiracy theory has really, I think a lot of people have jumped on that in the last year. All those things that, and one time somebody told me, we were talking about Wall Street and how whenever the market's on a bear market, all these people come out and talk negative. Whenever it's on a bull market, all the people come out and talk positive, right?
Trying to manipulate
all those people are still there in the opposite time. The bears are still there when the market's doing great. They're just not on camera.
Right.
And
Sun Tzu,
who you
right?
decide to listen to. Yeah.
Sun Tzu, make yourself look weak when you're strong. Make yourself look strong when you're weak.
There you go. But yeah, that definitely I could see that the future is very dependent on that, and 2021 will be a year of kind of recognizing that there has to be some valid, and that's I think where a lot of the things that Kent started talking about with International Alliance of Trust Chains, using new tools like distributed ledger, different types of encryption protection,
right,
to start to bring the tools to enable privacy. And I think that's the thing when we played a little bit from clips with Dr. Roop, who was talking about what the IEEE is doing, and actually funding efforts to try to make technology for individual citizens' privacy. If we can make one person be able to control their data and have all the tools to be able to do so, no matter where it's stored and what platform it's on, having the data in a single source, a sovereign identity. If that tool exists and they can just turn it loose for everybody to use, it changes the world. And that's where those programs are going, the things we're working on in there. And I think 2021 is going to be huge in seeing those start to come to light.
Yeah, I would like to see, back to Kent's point too, is the legislation to be able to support that, because there's going to be resistance from the big banks, the big companies that rely on the collection of your privacy information, how they profit from that in various areas. It's a lot less in the EU, so you've got GDPR that allows the consumer, the data subject, to control that more. We're looking at possibly next year getting some landmark legislation, the Safe Data Act. We were talking about that earlier. Pulling together several federal privacy laws into one big privacy law. It's about time. It's overdue. In aligning that legislation to make sure that we don't get the resistance from the big corporate conglomerates, the special interest groups, the lobbyists.
We know that's going to happen,
right?
though, and
Absolutely.
the big social media companies, we won't mention any names,
right,
but we all know what we're talking about, that their whole business model is taking
they're going to lose money.
Your private information and profiting from it.
Yeah, I think that's one of those things for 2021 we should be looking at.
I think it's going to, could be critical mass. It's something that definitely has stepped up to the forefront and changed with the at home and everybody trying to figure out who's who and what's right when they can't get out in social groups and feel it, between people in the real world.
Yeah, we talk about multi-factor authentication. I have it enabled on almost everything. I'm a little irritated with one of the platforms that we use for our business. They allow you to register 2 devices. I don't want any of my devices to be registered as trusted. I want to do MFA for everything. And, they force you to do you only allowed 2 devices. I get it, because they're trying to prevent, multiple users of the platform based on your license, but there's got to be a better way. So, MFA in having that digital identity would provide that level of trust, assuming that that framework is trusted as well.
Yeah. And I think the balance, and that's the thing with the framework trusted, it has to move into a trusted capability away from special interests being able to control it, which is literally when Kent was talking about the International Alliance of Trust Chains. It is looking at what are the neutral pieces that have to be put out publicly to say, this is how these things are set up so that you can trust them, and we'll make that public. And that's a big part of it is, yes, we can make technology, and a company can own technology and sell you a service. As soon as you type into that, your data is going somewhere into their control. But the International Alliance of Trust Chains is that neutral organization that says any data in our control, we publicly display how it's handled.
Right.
And it's a new thought process, but it also requires the infrastructure and the funding, because it's not funded by selling your information.
Right.
It has to be funded by a large body of people.
No conflict
in
of
order to protect
interest.
them and the individual. And the individuals, what do they gain? How much money do they have to spend to protect their privacy? I think the answer we've seen has been zero.
Other than what they're, whatever they're subscribing to, where that there might be a false sense of security there, right? So
Yeah.
I get an alert, but is it too late?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and I'm relying on that big behemoth social media company that says in this policy, I accepted that they have my best interest. Or that worldwide shopping company that you only have one of that says they have my best interest. I believe. There's that button, right?
Oh, yeah. I am who I say I am.
Yep.
Yeah. How do you assure that in providing the control to the data subject, following the OECD privacy principles right down to the T.
Yeah.
I think it's coming. I don't know it'll be 2021 and maybe a couple years. And then there's the trust aspect of it. We talked about the misinformation. You're going to have some citizens that will be like, no, this is just another method of the government to control my information, and so I'm not going to participate. So, there's going to be trade-offs.
I think that's what the third generation distributed ledgers do. Basically, we had Bitcoin, cryptocurrency was the first generation. Then we went to smart contracts, and they could do single functions. But a third generation has the whole governance structure involved with it.
Right.
All the pieces that say this, we have the neutral display of who's involved, what they did, but also the protection of the individual. And that balance, that piece is that governance piece. But that technology is, a couple years down the road. The service is out now. Are they going to, how are they going to hold up until then? It's all a matter of what do we have in 2021. It might be, a transition year, but it's definitely something different than we thought it would be beginning of last year.
Well, some of the complications I see as well is you're going to see large, complex, organized crime. You're going to see state actors who still, we have spy agencies globally. Every country's got them. They're going to compromise that framework, whatever framework it is, because, we're not doing, clandestine work the same way anymore. We're not traveling around the world with different identities. How do you issue multiple identities? And who's going to have influence over that? So again, we're talking about a trusted framework, but we also have to keep in the back of our minds those influences outside of our control that may compromise. It's just a matter of time. Mm-hmm. Those frameworks.
The unknown, and that's actually something as these infrastructures are stood up that that is already being identified that there's entirely new issues.
Yeah.
And if all of the lawyers in the state of Colorado were required to be on a distributed ledger, now we have, and they might even, their privacy might even be protected, where you can't tell who they are and what their name is. But now we have the demographics, the economics of a whole demographic of people in a particular region.
Right.
And it's a whole new set of data that becomes viable for use for good or bad. You know?
And maybe
Who
that's where
has
you
access
start,
to
right?
it?
So you start with a demographic, say, such as if you're a licensed attorney, or when you graduate from college, your digital identity is now attached to the degree program that you attended. Start out with a demographic like that. Look at the case analysis, make sure it's working as it's intended. Use those to get into the other,
Yeah.
cases, the other uses.
Well, what you have though with this economic information is now how the whole legal profession as a whole is operating.
Yeah.
Did they do more cases this year than last year?
And what
Did
were
things
those cases?
speed up in the last quarter? Are they increased in an area or reduced in a certain area? Are they related to a certain jurisdiction that might be more lenient than another? You have these relationships that didn't exist before that show how stable a captured demographic of people are. So it's just an interesting dynamic that now we can see from starting third generation distributed ledgers where a whole demographic of people are required to be involved. There's a new set of problems.
Right. Well, and then based on the results and the outcomes, that may, from those subjects that are the participants, they may not like the outcome or what the data suggests.
Well, the outcome, and the thing is that it can be masked to their individual privacy. But knowing that all the attorneys in the state got more business this year and they're all around $350,000 income is a very good economic indicator.
Sure. It's good information.
Yes.
Back to the intelligence piece.
Exactly. So that and that's what when we talk about the IATC that Senator Lambert brought up, that's the control that's looking at adjusting
Right.
and identifying those pieces and how they're kept either neutrally available or not available to the to who would have access to them. Yeah,
It's going to be interesting the next couple of years to see how everything balances out. I do a lot of work with. I actually lead the Small Business Development Center cyber team here locally in for Pikes Peak region. So for El Paso and Teller County. And so there's been a lot of focus this year with small business and how to keep them viable. And we're now working at the national level with the Small Business Administration, developing a framework to go into another topic we were talking about, and that is how do we train people, right? How do we train citizens and how do we train small business, right? And so it should be a unified approach, not, a piece here, a piece there. And, there should be a unified approach with cybersecurity experts and include your psychologists and include some
Lawyers
aspects of, because you've got to make sure you're delivering it appropriately. You've got the right mindset and the context to deliver it, because going back to some of our previous conversations, that lingo, those acronyms, all of those things, people are looking at you like glazed over. You've got to educate them without overwhelming them.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think we have a challenging time ahead. I don't know if we've covered everything we had in mind for what we think is coming down the line, but we're definitely running into the time we allotted for, kind of this discussion, and we hope everybody out there has gained a lot from it. We're always looking for great topics and great guests for people things you need, things you want to hear from, the companies that you want to hear from. And we've also started some new lines where we do product reviews. If a company wants to have their product kind of looked at, evaluated, a discussion, and publicly vet that,
or a service,
bring it to us. Reach out to us at New Cyber Frontier, and you'll see us incorporating a lot of these things that help the community here in the new future. As we become a great quite a big reach here as to our listener base and around the world. And a lot of times, it's a small group of people, but it is very diverse.
Yeah,
and
we're a great resource.
A lot of, the few people that are in every company that need to know about cybersecurity, and especially CEOs. If you're a CEO of a company, you got to be tuned in to what we're talking about and
Right.
the path.
And then you'll learn the right questions to be asking your CIO or your CISO or your CTO.
Definitely. All right. Well, thanks for joining today and on the special year in review. Signing off, Chris Gorog.
Shawn Murray.
Thanks a lot for joining.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to New Cyber Frontier. Remember to follow or like our post and circulate each new show to your networks. We keep you informed, bring you the latest news, explore new trends, and find the hottest topics. With New Cyber Frontier, you don't have to be a computer or cybersecurity expert, just get plugged in. We encourage you to get involved. Tell us what topics interest you and join our mailing lists. You can find us on the web at www.newcyberfrontier.com. That's newcyberfrontier.com. Check out our previous interviews and please let us know if there are any topics that you would like to hear discussed. See you next time on New Cyber Frontier.